What's up, guys? Adrian the American back for another week of YouTube. And as I mentioned before, I kind of want to delve deeper into some of the TikToks that I've made in the past and maybe talk a little more at length about them, because on TikTok it's really meant for short form content, only a couple of seconds, and I feel like I can't fully explain some of the differences. So looking back at my old TikToks, surprising, I'm almost up to 3 months of TikToks, still under 1,000 followers on TikTok, but slowly grinding towards that first 1,000 TikTok followers. So the first TikTok I made, I think, about a difference in Luxembourg was actually this one here.
What's different in Luxembourg? No flush handle. Button for 1 and 2.
And basically that one is the difference in the toilets. And I actually noticed these differences when I first came to Europe, when I met my wife and I flew to Germany. The same thing here in Luxembourg, that the toilets have kind of two different flushing settings, one being to kind of preserve a little more water and the other being for a real solid flush, or maybe not so solid. And in the US, basically you just have one lever, pull it down, it releases the water, and if you hold it for a while, it releases all the water in the reserve tank, and then it's empty, and you gotta wait a while for it to refill the water. So if you need a second flush, you probably gotta wait about a minute. I better wait for this plane to go overhead, because I got the doors open so that there's less of an echo, hopefully. So the second difference I kind of noticed with the toilets, and this one's a little gross, there's kind of like a platform on a lot of the toilets here in Europe. When you're not going number one, kind of goes and sits there. Yeah, it's just a little gross, especially if you're having a rough week. Yeah, in the US, the whole system is set up so that where you're sitting is where the bottom of the toilet, where everything's gonna flush out of, goes. So you usually don't have as much kind of falling on the sides or building up or anything. Alright, that's way too much information about my bowel movements. The second one that I wanted to point out was this one here.
What's different in Luxembourg? The windows open 2 ways.
That's weird.
And basically it's talking about the windows and doors and how you have kind of 3 different settings for the handle here. One is locked, halfway is usually fully open, swinging from either the left or right side open. And then the third, where you can kind of crack the top part of the window so that you can let air in without opening the whole window. I don't know if that makes any sense. It kind of just tilts the whole window and allows for a little bit of fresh air to come in from the top of the window. And it's really nice because in Germany, and I think here in Luxembourg as well, there's a thing called Luften, where you basically air out your house. And in the US, you can do this as well, but it takes a lot more effort. The windows in the US are built completely differently. Of course, the US is huge, so it depends where exactly you live in the US, but for the most part, the windows are kind of 2 separated windows, and the one that's closest to the inside, you can slide up, and then they stack, and so there's 2 windows on top of each other. And in the bottom half, where the window was before you slid it up, usually there's a screen of some sort to keep out any insects. Now, I will say that I do miss that a lot, because sometimes when we do our Luften here, I'll find little flies or fruit flies flying around for hours after, and it really annoys me, especially if you do it right before bed and then there's little bugs flying in your eyes as you're trying to fall asleep. So I do kind of miss the screens, but at the same time, I think the windows are built in a much more cost-efficient way for heating and stuff here. I think it's just nice to have the multiple features. So I kind of wish that was something that was done more in the US, but I think there were some comments on that, and basically the cost feasibility in the US, it's just so much cheaper for those other types of windows, and it's kind of been the building design standard So I think the cost of those is just substantially cheaper than European style windows. All right, the third and final TikTok is this one here.
What's
That's
different in
suspicious.
Luxembourg? Highest minimum wage in the world, $3,026 a month.
Highest minimum wage in the world, and I think it's contested between here and Australia. There's a lot of qualifications necessary to earn the highest amount that you can in Luxembourg, so you can argue whatever you want. I'm not going to make a TikTok that says the second highest wage in the world, especially when there's room to argue that it could be the highest in the world. The most interesting thing about this to me is that in the US, on the Democratic side of the political system, for the last 10 years or more, there's been people trying to fight for a minimum wage of $15, and some cities have actually implemented that minimum wage of $15 or even more. But on a federal level, it's still only, I think, $7.25 an hour, which I think here in Luxembourg, there's a lot of work that comes from outside of the country where people, come here for that higher wage, and I'm not exactly sure how Luxembourg is able to offer such high wages. But in the US, there are just some rural areas, and they don't seem to be able to sustain higher pay. That being said, I think most everywhere that people live, larger cities, even smaller cities and stuff, they're really having to raise those wages because the cost of living is just outrageous. And honestly, $15 an hour isn't even enough to live in most of the cities. Yeah, a bit conflicted on that subject, but I'm hoping that people continue to get paid what they're worth. I really like when I made a TikTok about restaurants here, people said that the restaurant workers are paid a living wage, and therefore the responsibility of tipping a high percentage doesn't fall on customers. And honestly, I just think that that makes sense. Allows more people to be able to go out and eat a meal and not feel guilty that they can't give more to the waiter and waitress. But I will say, if you ask most waitresses and waiters back in the US, I bet that they prefer the system they have in place, because most of the time they're earning much more, at least in large cities and at upscale restaurants and new restaurants in cities and towns. I remember people making $500 to $700 a night as waiters and waitresses, which is more than I ever earned as an engineer. So yeah, that's my tangent for today. Thanks for tuning in this week. I've got to edit this, and I'm hoping to put it out this weekend. Stay tuned next week for another episode. Thanks.